I want to read you a short story, very short, less than 2 pages. And what I want you to do is listen. And particularly, what I want you to listen for is, what do you see as the purpose or the meaning of life? Right. And maybe even more importantly, I want you to wrestle with that question. Again, the question is, what do you see as the purpose of life? And then once you're clear, right, once you have decided on your particular answer, I then want you to ask yourself a second question, right? Whatever you see as the purpose of life, you then have to ask yourself, how aligned do I live my life according to that purpose? Okay. All right. So here is the story. The neurologists could scarcely believe their eyes. Never before had they seen a brain like this one, right? This was in the laboratory at the University of Wisconsin. A team stared at the latest MRI scans. They couldn't figure out what was going on, right? The subject showed a level of gamma waves unknown to neuroscience, okay? The left side of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain associated with happiness, was bursting with activity, while the right-hand side, associated with negative thoughts, registered next to nothing. When the scientists shared the results, the press proclaimed that they'd found the man with the most beautiful brain on earth. His level of mind control is astonishing, wrote one reporter, and the upbeat impulses in his brain are off the charts. Who was this man? And how did his brain get this way? The man in the scanner was a Buddhist monk named Matthew Ricard. He'd grown up in Paris and earned a PhD in molecular genetics at a prestigious institute. But at the age of 26, with a promising scientific career ahead, he left it all behind and went to Tibet. All right. He ended up clocking hear me correctly here. He ended up clocking more than 60,000 hours of meditation. Year in and year out, he fed his brain with thoughts of love and compassion to staggering effect. By the time he ended up in the scanner, according to the headlines, he was the happiest man in the world. What the monk achieved is something millions of people chase as the ultimate goal in their lives. We can't get enough of mantras, methods, etc., other life hacks that promise greater mindfulness, prosperity, and well-being. You could easily spend 60,000 hours on books about the 7 habits, 12 rules, or one big secret to living a long and happy life. But you can also look at Mr. Ricard in a different light. Here's a guy who spent 60,000 hours. That's almost 8,000 work days, a solid 30 years of full-time work inside his own head. 30 years in which he did little for others. 30 years in which he didn't lift a finger to make the world a better place. Maybe you dream of doing something else with your limited time on the planet. Maybe your own happiness isn't the prime objective, let alone your ultimate life goal. I just want you to sit with that story. I just want you, I'm a dramatic pause, right? I know we're on a podcast and you're like, why is there no talking? But I just want you to sit with that story, right? Because here's what came up for me after reading this. In a world that is focused on being neurodivergent, on nervous system regulation, on narcissism, right? It's just so easy to get lost inside of your own head. right? The number of people, particularly in the world that I live in, perhaps is different for you, but in the online coaching space, in the therapy space, even to some degree in the nonprofit space, because it is a lot to do with behavior change and, self-improvement and things like that. It is easy to be focused on your own personal happiness, your own personal fulfillment, right? It's coming at us from all angles. And I'm not denying the importance of any of those three things that I named: neurosystem regulation, neurodivergent, or narcissism, including, I'm also not denying the importance of your own personal happiness, right? I wrote a post, I think it was at the end of 2025, where I saw people basically saying, what are themes, words, phrases that we should be leaving in 2025, or that were played out basically in 2025. And I said those three words, knowing it was going to piss people off, right? Right. Anything that is a label that we carry, and then someone comes along and says, not that label, of course, there's going to be some level of offense or annoyance or, resentment, whatever it might be. Okay. Right. I just put yourself in that shoes. Think about the labels that you have. Right. So I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm a Christian. And if someone came along and said Black, woman, and Christian were all overused, played out, whatever, in 2025, I might have an attitude. Right now, in some ways, I'll be like, yeah, we did a lot with these words, right? But I'm also a little bit more objective than the average person. Okay. So I made this post and I said, these are the three words that I really want us to leave in 2025. Like, if I could choose, if it was up to me, right? And then, of course, people responded. One of the people who responded said, I'm going to keep using the words, particularly nervous system regulation. But really, all three of them, she talked about being neurodivergent, blah, 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 right? And she said she's going to keep using the words and that they're critical for her work, et cetera, et cetera. And my response to her was, oh, don't confuse my posts. Like, I have zero expectation that you would stop using the word, nor do I even have the opinion that you should stop using the word, right? Personally, like, that's a personal decision. Okay. I'm not encouraging you to not use the word. I can see how the social media post might say that. So that's fair. Right. But I don't have the expectation that anybody would be listening to me and actually stop using the word, because it's not the word that's the problem. Right. I do think it's interesting that everything was about nervous system regulation in 2025. But what does that mean for 2024 and 2023? Was nervous system regulation not a thing? Or is it just a new thing that you learned about? Because nervous system regulation is as old as time. But I'm also a therapist. So, I have a lot more background of such things than someone else. So I get it. Right. But what I explained to her was I was responding to the overuse of these terms, the overuse of these words. It's not that the words or the labels or the concepts are good or bad. It's just that sometimes we overuse, which is essentially the same point that the story is making. All right. And I think we should be mindful of our own happiness, particularly those of us who are in helping professions. The nurses, the teachers, the therapists, the coaches, the nonprofit EDs, right? Like, there are all of these people who are in helping professions, and that group of people really needs to be mindful of their own happiness. And honestly, we need to be mindful in a way that we haven't in times past, right? Which is why there's so much burnout, right? There's so much overworking and so much need for nervous system regulation, because we have not learned how to work in a way that aligns with our mission, aligns with who we are, not against, right? But just because something is important doesn't make it priority, right? Like, my own happiness is important. Listen, you ain't going to talk me out of my own happiness. You really are not. But I understand what the main thing is. Like, I understand what the priority is for my life, right? And you ultimately get to decide what is your priority for your life. And I mostly tell this story to help you get off of autopilot and actually choose, right? I tell the story to help you get clear, to encourage you to decide, because most people live a average life, what I would consider to be a mediocre life, uh, simply because they're on autopilot, simply because they have not decided, they have not, you know, put their proverbial feet in the sand. It's not that they don't have desires. It's not that they don't have intentions. What they have not yet made is decisions. That is the purpose of me sharing this story, is to encourage you to be clear about what your priority is and what you see as the purpose of life. It doesn't matter whether I agree with that or not. It's irrelevant. As long as you are clear, right? That's what matters. And then that second part of the question is then, okay, well, once you're clear, then it's about practicing, not perfectly, right? But practicing living in that truth. That's what I'm encouraging you to do. Not by neglecting what else is important, but by learning to keep the priority. I was reading, I know I do nothing but reading. That's my whole life. I was reading Kobe Bryant's book, or one of books about Kobe Bryant. And one of the things that I love, first of all, I'm not a Kobe Bryant fan, just for context. I like to throw that out there just because I am a believer that I don't have to uh, be a huge fan of you to learn something from you, especially when you clearly demonstrated greatness. Why does it matter whether I like your personality? That's irrelevant. So I'm not a huge Kobe fan, but I do believe there's something to learn from him. And indeed, there was, right? And this is one of the concepts that I teach to my clients is the difference between being a healthy high achiever and an unfulfilled hustler. A lot of times, both people are busy. Both people are successful. Both people are, doing a lot. But how they're managing all that they're doing is often out of alignment by their own standards, not by mine, right? And so one of the things that I loved about Kobe's story is that he had a very, very, very rigorous basketball schedule. And I don't mean like games. I mean his own personal workout schedule where he would get up. Now forgive me because I might mess up the times, right? But the concept is what I'm communicating. He would get up at, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and go to the gym and work out for an hour or two. And then he would come home and eat breakfast with his kids and his wife, right? And then he would go back at noon and he would have another, you know, 2-hour workout, right? And then he would come home and he'd have time with his wife and dinner, right, with his kids. And then he would have a third workout after everybody went to bed. This is what I mean by you can do what is important and what is priority, right? But it requires that you know what is priority, right? Now, one could argue that Kobe's priority was basketball. Someone else could argue that his priority was his family, right? Like, what I would say is he seemed to have lived in a way that honors his own values, right? And I'm encouraging you to do the same. That is the purpose of today. I'm encouraging you, constantly reminding you of this because your fulfillment, right? The fulfillment that you're looking for is in the life that you live tightly aligned with your own values, friend. Onward and upward.